Read Dick. Dick is good. Hello! Welcome back. Hello to the new people that are finding my channel, so I'm very, very happy right now. So, what did I want to do? This is a list of male writers that I adore, and it was one of the hardest lists I've ever had to make, standing here with my mic, because I need a mic stand so bad. I'm going to buy one. I picked these writers based on just writers I love. There's no, literary thing. It's just writers I've read that I love, that I revisit. So I'm going to start with a really new writer, Antonio Bibondelli, and I think that's how you pronounce his last name. So he is a writer that has written the Kishi and a couple of other things, and I've literally inhaled his work. The Keshi is this phenomenal book that just takes you on this ride. It's a fantasy based on African myth, and considering the book community is all about own voice writers and this and that, why is no one talking about this man? He is phenomenal. I adore him, and his writing style, it's beautiful, it's epic, and it's big, and I adore it. And I'm currently reading his new book, which he sent me, which I will be talking about in another video, and I cannot wait to read it. Do check out his work. He is an absolutely phenomenal writer. There is no way around that. So J. Kristoff is my second pick. J. Kristoff is unusual because, again, he's new blood. J. Kristoff is also a writer. I don't like his YA, but his adult fantasy is brilliant. I mean, Nevernight, for obviously, and I think Storm Dancer is considered an adult fantasy. I think it's crossover appeal. I don't like the stuff he co-wrote with a friend, but I do love his solo work. He is a phenomenal writer, Australian, quirky, funny, metalhead, and in his own words describes his music as obnoxious noise, so that's always a good thing. He's a writer that I have visited and talked about and screamed his name from rooftops. So let's go down to this list, shall we? David Joy. David Joy is an American writer. He has written some phenomenal work. He talks about the everyman, the old man, the people that are really underrepresented in fiction. And he talks about, the rednecks, the trailer park people, the deep south. He talks about people with problems, PTSD, drug addiction, crystal, whatever. And he just writes these phenomenal books. I've read his 4 novels and they've blown me away. And if you've not read David Joy, do check out David Joy. I cannot scream his name enough. So, hello, David Joy. F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, this is a writer. He wrote The Great Gatsby. That's The Beautiful and the Damned is another one. He's a writer I picked because I've read his work so many times now that it's just unbelievable. I think I've chimed in with so much of his work. It's just, I've revisited many times. He died thinking he was a failure. That's what's tragic about F. Scott Fitzgerald. He died thinking he was a failure. Still, it's tragic. He was the voice of the flapper generation, booze of jazz. He's a phenomenal writer and a very tragic end to a great man. Although even his former wife had a very tragic end. So Zelda died horribly too. Hemingway. Hemingway seems to be the product of hate in the book community on the internet, and I adore him. Hemingway, my favourite novel by him is The Movable Feast, but he's done countless others. With Hemingway, there's very little surface level, it's all metaphorical, and he just writes beautifully. Old Man and the Sea is another one that I love, and I've read and adore. It's interesting, because I've read so much of his work now that it's just imprinted into my skull. He's that level for me. JRR Tolkien. Tolkien is the god of fantasy. He is responsible for the tropes that we know, love, and so well. Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, the Arthurian Legends books, Beowulf. He is a phenomenal writer, and if you're a fantasy fan and you've not at least tried Tolkien, you're missing out, because he's basically the granddaddy of it all. There we go. Tolkien. Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman, Stardust, probably his most well-known, Oceans at the End of the Lane. Again, well-known books, but he's written tons, and it's a countless list. I've not read everything he's done, but I'm pretty close. Gaiman is a phenomenal writer with a unique voice. He's very good at dark fantasy and dark fairy tales, and The Graveyard book is gorgeous in its own self. He writes across genre, he writes across age. Gaiman is Gaiman. And just please do check out Neil Gaiman if you haven't, because Neil Gaiman is phenomenal. Philip K. Dick. Now that's an interesting name. Philip K. Dick is probably most well known for Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which became the brilliant film Blade Runner. But His work is extensive. It deals with people. It deals with the breakdown of modern society. It deals with the faults of mankind. It deals with almost giving in to technology and letting it control our lives. Philip K. Dick is a writer that, if you have not read Philip K. Dick, where have you been? Read Philip K. Dick. Read Dick. Dick is good. Matt Haig. Matt Haig is a phenomenal writer, fiction and non-fiction. His own struggles with mental health are brilliant. He was recently being trolled by that twat Piers Morgan. He is a phenomenal writer. I could list countless books of his to read and pick up. I found him through How to Stop Time, but I've read all of his work, and I've kind of just been pulled into this phenomenal writer that seems to very strong social media presence, very interesting social media presence. Follow him on Twitter, by the way, because he's just interesting, full stop. William Gibson, the soothsayer of the modern age. He basically invented the word cyberspace. He invented so much of the slang we use. He's predicted so much. Neuromancer is probably his most well-known work, but he is the granddaddy of cyberpunk. He is phenomenal, and you need to read him. He is just a phenomenal writer. He has had his work turned into films. It can be somewhat hit and miss with his work on screen, to say the least, on the subject. William Gibson is one of my favourite writers ever, and he is a writer that I will literally go out and read everything he's ever done 1,000,000 times over, and then some. Mona Lisa Overdrive is another really good one to get your teeth into, and there's just countless lists. I'll be here all week if I wanted to list William Gibson's work. Mark Twain. Mark Twain is the great American writer. He is probably one of the few great American writers, and this misconception that he was a racist is still very prevalent due to the use of language within his books, but actually he was the opposite. Actually Googling stuff to find out the real person before making tweets about it is a good thing, because the book community is just a bunch of idiots. On that note, Mark Twain, what can I say that's not been said already? Go out, pick up his books, give him a try. A lot of his work's now public domain. You can read it on Kindle. It's almost like a lost time, a history that's pretty much lost to the modern world, forgotten history in almost a sense. He's written about a time in American history where things were borderline dystopia. Fantastic writer. Mark Twain. George Orwell writes doom and gloom. George Orwell, I think we all know George Orwell's work. Animal Farm, 1984, George Orwell. Do this AMSR style and piss you all off. Again, kind of a soothsayer of literary work, and kind of scary. I mean, a lot of people judge 1984, that they call it incel fiction and all of this, and I'm like, what the fuck are you reading? It's actually the opposite. He is a phenomenal writer, and someone that I've just fallen in love with so many times. I fall out of love with his work, then I reread it, and then I'm back there. You can blame A.G. MacDonald for this, by the way. Isaac Asimov. Now, I have problems saying this man's last name. He is a hard science fiction writer. He writes this gut-wrenching, visceral, hard science fiction that pulls you in and keeps you pulled in. It's dense and it's heavy and somewhat scary. I love dark science fiction, and if you've not read it, read it. Read Isaac Asimov. Just read it. As you can tell, I'm somewhat buzzed on coffee today, so hello. Jack Kerouac. The voice of the Beat Generation. His most well-known book is On the Road. Kerouac is a writer that writes... His style is unique, his voice is unique. He kind of died thinking he was a failure too. He's very interesting because you can actually listen to his spoken words, poems and things like that. You can actually listen to him read his work, which is phenomenal. And just a great writer, Jack Kerouac. It's simple writing, it's to the point, but it's there. James Ellroy is one of the crossover writers here. So he writes noir, fiction, crime. LA Confidential was turned into a film, The Black Dahlia. And all of this stuff, there's countless other things that he's written. I've pretty much read everything. He also goes into history. It was quite funny looking at Twitter at what people say about him. And I'm like, yeah, no, this is actually historically accurate. We cannot airbrush our history in the language we used in the 30s, 40s and 50s, even up until the 80s. Do check out James Ellroy. He's a complete crazy guy in the best way possible. His mother's own murder, his Dark Place book where he kind of solves his own mother's murder. He's a phenomenal writer, and just listen to him, read him, however you want to consume his media. Try James Ellroy. Cormac McCarthy. Now, I have problems saying his first name because it's a weird first name. He is a phenomenal writer again. He wrote The Road and No Country for Old Men. He writes this dark twisting fiction about broken and dysfunctional characters that exist. Comic McCarthy is the voice of Comic McCarthy is a god. Most of these writers are, to be honest. So yeah, they are my male writers. I'm going to include a list down below if you have missed any of them. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.